Okay, I say this every time. I think we are live. If anybody sees us out there in the chat, just go ahead and pop in and we'll know we're here. But I'm excited about this for a lot of reasons. I'm in my new studio. I am home for a few weeks, which is amazing for me. I also just got to hang out with Patrick at his office last week and kind of see the digs and get the story. So, Patrick, why don't you introduce yourself? Yeah, the digs, the skateboard park in a room.
There is a skate park, literally. That's not not green screen.
full on skate park.
Yeah,
There is a
with
half pipe in his office.
with improvements and parkade wood squares to make the look just right. So I just got to be like
There you
super
go.
specific
There you go.
here. I digress. Patrick, why don't you introduce yourself for people and let them know what you do?
Yeah, I'm a security researcher here at Vulnerabilities. Been a security researcher, I don't know, 2 or 3 years. Mostly over the last, I don't know, 15 years, I've built cybersecurity companies. So I helped build Duo Security, helped spin Census out of the University of Michigan, Blue Mira out of Ann Arbor, detection and response, Nucleus Security, and then decided to, I really was interested in research, so I decided to join VulnCheck to get the under the hood look at vulnerabilities and exploitation and intel.
I just want to Tom, I don't know, man. Like, I'm just gonna pause on the humble toss-outs of those names of companies that he's been involved with. I'm like, just nothing, man. Just humble me, poor little me.
Dude, I love it.
Yeah, no, Patrick, that's such a dope background.
It's funny because every time I went to a company, they're like, "Why would you go to a company that's doing two-factor? Why would you go to a company that does detection and response? Why would you go to a company that like is spinning out of a university?" Or I didn't actually go there. I was just an advisor. But then, they were like, "Why would you get into vuln management? Nobody cares about vuln management." But like a lot of it is like the right timing, right?
Sure.
The right people.
Yeah.
And it's very cyclical. Like the same themes tend to come back. So yeah,
I
I'm
didn't
very
expect
fortunate.
to unpack that with you, of like that there's always this kind of, the right time to be on the bleeding edge, if that makes sense, right? And the right time to be pushing something. And I think maybe this vulnerability, the challenges we're seeing in the vulnerability systems, the issues that we see globally, the issues that we see from cybercrime, like a lot of that has a core function in vulnerability, right? And vulnerability research. Before we get moving too far down that topic, Tom, do you mind introducing yourself? I mean, I imagine everybody knows who you are, but let's just pretend like they don't.
Maybe someone who doesn't know.
What up, Tom?
As I say in my video, Tom here from Learn Systems. I take technology topics and turn them into content that people can learn and action from. That's usually my goal, is to educate the community. I've been doing it on YouTube for almost 10 years now, 9 years.
Wow.
So technically, I started the channel in 2016. I just didn't get serious about it until 2017. So almost pushing 10 years. And so I've been working in IT, MSP, and doing all that fun stuff since 2003. So does that make that 23 years doing that stuff? And mostly I do just a lot of consulting right now for helping people solve engineering problems around storage, virtualization, and sometimes security, and putting it together in a cohesive manner so it doesn't get exploited, and telling them not to expose RDP.
Yeah. Well, and you also, if there was a Venn diagram,
RDP.
Yeah.
If there was a Venn diagram of Tom Lawrence, it would be like deep technical, tactical knowledge and sharing side, and then shit poster. It would be middle Venn diagram.
That's what I was doing just before this. So if anyone follows me on LinkedIn, LinkedIn is where my shit posting goes.
Oh man. Well, Tom, I'm glad to have you here to round out the conversation. Patrick, let's talk about, let's ELI 5. Vulnerability, CVE, vulnerability system. I'm going to let you just go for a bit, and then we're going to pop in. But tell me a little bit about, like, what is a vulnerability? We'll start with that very basic question for the audience.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think, too, we can interlace some history in this as well. That I've learned. Like, I wasn't around in 2000 looking at vulns. Actually, back then, I was, like, cleaning viruses off computers.
Okay.
So security adjacent. Didn't really realize that at the time, but formatting hard drives, basically. we remember those days.
Oh yeah, I ran a retail store. We formatted a lot of hard drives.
Yeah, I had a retail store as well, Tom, in South Lyon.
No kidding.
The company's still around, surprisingly. Like, yeah, my buddy Mike runs it, which is cool. But yeah, I'll read this because like there's a lot of different definitions of what a vulnerability is. I spend most of my time in CVE world. So like, how do we identify things that are CVE-able? And what they use is an instance of one or more weakness in a product that can be exploited, causing a negative impact to confidentiality, integrity, or availability, a set of conditions or behaviors that allow the violation of an explicit or implicit security policy.
Okay.
Which there's a lot of gray area there to unpack as well, of like what could or could not be a vulnerability.
Sure.
But I think the main thing is like it has a negative impact to confidentiality, integrity, and availability, which for those don't know is called the CIA triad.
Yep.
Yeah, that was new to me 3 years ago. So
also correlated to the DAD
triad,
triad, which is disclosure, alteration, and destruction, I think, or denial, I believe it is. If you wanted to go really deep into that theory textbook, I suppose.
Yeah. And I think it's
someone
worth
like
noting
Zelda.
that there's
someone like Zelda a lot.
Yeah. So that's the triad we all grew up with. No, I think it's important to that last part about the contention of what is or isn't a vulnerability is something that gets played out that Patrick has a front row seat to. That's really interesting and insightful, because there can be times when the way it's distributed, which I'm sure we'll get into, like the CNAs versus MITR, et cetera, like the authorities, but there can be times when there is a discrepancy in a company and whether or not they accept what that behavior is or is not a CVE. The company may not see it that way, and it comes down to who's got to have a final say on whether or not this is actually a security vulnerability or it's not a bug, it's a feature. So
yeah, it could be a configuration issue that's something that's not a vulnerability. And I think we see a lot of companies tackling, trying to look at the vulnerabilities in misconfigurations.
Yeah.
Which is very common. Misconfigurations are a lot more common in cloud products, right? Like people putting their S3 buckets. That's not a vulnerability. That's you exposing something you shouldn't be via misconfiguration. So
sure. When you talk about security researcher and vulnerability researcher, what makes you have to research that? Like, let's tackle that question. Like, why do you need to exist? I guess is a great way to ask.
Yeah. I mean, to me, it's more curiosity than anything. I was at Nucleus Security, and I was a VP of marketing actually at the time. And what I found was like people are more interested in understanding trends in the data and getting information that's useful and helpful than being marketed to. And so naturally, having a technical background, being a sales engineer and product marketing and host a ton of different roles, but always being technical, I was curious myself to understand more about vulnerabilities and exploitation, in that I saw it from the sidelines. I saw it from an incident response perspective, but I never like dove into the data. And it's like everywhere you went, it's just an Excel spreadsheet. Like it is, vuln management has been for the last 25 years like a giant list of either CSV or JSON. And so the question is like, how can you actually pull information out and communicate that in a way that's valuable, so the world can understand like what's actually going on, what's impacted. And the reality is myself and most people are visual learners. So for me, that was taking the data from a format that was just raw data and then exploring that data and trying to understand the data and visualizing the data. And ultimately, when you visualize data, you're going to see things that are inaccurate, because like now you put it in this way and it's like, well, why does this look funny? And then it actually traces back to the data, in that like there's inaccuracies in the data. So then you get into data quality, data collection, all those adjacent things. But yeah, the reality is you could spend an infinite amount of time trying to understand everything about vulnerabilities, and it would take up all your time. Like there's just so many different avenues and so many different things to consider regarding products, vendors, vulnerabilities themselves, contributors to things like the CVE program, and then also all the global.
Well, now you've called it out.
Disclosing
what is the CVE program? So let's tackle that. Tom or Patrick, who wants to tackle it?
Oh, go ahead, Patrick.
Yeah.
I'll give you a start on
Oh,
that.
cool. Yeah, CVE program. So back in like the 2000s, right? There was a ton of different projects, and most of them were like bespoke hackers or companies tracking vulnerabilities.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you go to the MITRE website, there's like CVE map from like 15, 20 years ago that would try and map all these different IDs and identities, and you had so many different things and what people would identify. So the whole purpose of the CVE program was, how do we get an identifier that is universal and associate that with vulnerabilities so things become much, much more discoverable and understood. So when we're talking about a vulnerability, we're talking about the same thing.
Yeah.
Even though it might be in different products, it might be in
and I'll
different
pause this real quick, because we
Yeah.
still have some of these problems, right? If you've ever noticed, like when you think about threat groups, somebody over here calls them Fancy Bear, someone over here calls them APT
Yeah.
974, somebody over here calls them, Judy
UNC
Pants.
47.
Yeah, or whatever it might be, right?
Yep.
And so taking that back to vulnerabilities, what you just said, Patrick, was CVE came about as a methodology to make sure we're all talking about the same numbered entity, the same information, the same vulnerability, same problem. Is that a fair way of summarizing that?
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's really important to note we need a common vernacular for how we describe these problems, so we're all on the same page. There has to be just a common tongue that if I say CVE and give a number, you know what it is, you know what it's related to, you know how that vulnerability works, so we know we're talking about the same thing. That is just like the core importance of a lot of the things we do, and it's been established in a lot of other industries. We have common phrasing we use for how we describe something in engineering and any of these other standards, and we're still getting there, I feel, because it moves fast. It's a lot different, and like Matt said earlier, it's not, we were kept on, it's not as tangible in the security world because it's a softer vulnerability. As in, a contentious debate, is having admin a vulnerability or a feature because you need to log into the box for the first time, but then the box doesn't force you to change it? So is the vulnerability that you didn't get forced change, or that it was admin, but I need to log into it because I have to set it up, it has to have something on it, I can't just log in? So there's contention around that.
And the comparison, just for the audience's sake, we were talking about this before the show. The comparison I was making is that with cars and the formation of NHTSA, or National Highway and Safety, Motor Vehicle Safety, and NHTSA, whatever that is, just Safety and Transportation, I don't remember, NHTSA, that was formed after the Motor Vehicle Safety Act of 1966, that was formed after Ralph Nader kind of called out the industry for making unsafe stuff. Well, in the car, you only have this metric of injury to human, right? And then stresses of materials. And so the way they were able to approach this was by passing regulations that were standards that said, if you make a car, it needs to have a brake light on the left and a brake light on the right on both the front and the rear, and they need to actuate when one presses the brake more than blank. Those developed over time. But in my mind, that's much more linear and easy to calculate than all of the challenges with software creation, the way it's made. Tom's point that he just made of, if it's admin, and then you don't change it, was that a failure of the driver, or is that a failure of the car? Like at some point you have to turn the wheel and not hit objects. And so there is a balance of that. Anyways, Patrick, thanks for that segue. I didn't mean to cut you off, but
no. And I think on your note, Bob Lord talks a lot about trying to drive towards regulation. He worked at CISA, similar to the auto industry. And I think, like, you look at some of the initiatives, CISA Secure by Design was well-intended, like good practices, like, you should do those things. The reality is everyone signs up for an optional program, and then the follow through, there's just no accountability.
There was literally an organization I talked to that was signing, goes, what's the problem if we don't do anything in this but sign up to get the credrit? My attorney,
it's all about marketing.
Because
it's like, oh man, like, I'm going to be cheerleaded and have government endorsement that I signed an optional pledge, but there's no accountability. And reality is that's what I saw happen, is vendors racing to get signed up on that thing just so they're check the box and look like they're secure. And I think that's an unfortunate reality. I don't think that was the intention.
No.
But at the end of the day, it's like, ultimately, like, regulation is what drives accountability to some extent. And so I think easily there could be a debate of, like, should software be regulated for security? And
the EU has answered that question with the CRA. I mean, there are
great. Go, Tom. That's a great time to talk about this. Actually,
what's the CRA?
What's the CRA,
Tom?
It's not the Community Reinvestment Act.
I had that note pulled up because I want to make sure I got the acronym right.
It's actually the European Cyber Resilience Act. It's the Cyber Resilience Act.
Well, yes, the EU Cyber Resilience Act Catalyst, CRA. Catalyst part is weird, but it's the new laws in Europe that require manufacturers to report vulnerabilities much more strictly. Who's making the words right here? When I read, I slurred words more.
It's okay. It's all right.
Now
We're
I'm not
good.
reading. I can rant. The concept is really good that there's much more stringent controls and rules around software. Software's got this free pass that indemnifies them of consequences. And we've just accepted that if something's bad, it's okay. It's they're perfectly fine every time there's one of these egregious problems. And it's kind of it's much more tangible. If someone gets injured in a car don't have a safety belt, they hit something, you fly out the windshield, that's bad. That's very direct contact. You can understand
kinetic, you might say.
Yeah, but the consequences of a CVE, like, so someone got into my email, that sounds tragic, but these are latent effects. The secondary effects of this are the worst service we have at hospitals because of security problems, the worst service we have to any critical infrastructure type of service. If electricity turns off, that's a real problem. And you're like, well, that's bad, call the power company. Well, no, they left RDP.
Manufacturing plants going down,
right?
Casinos, you can't gamble.
real social problems there.
Well, I don't even know what happened last night. YouTube went down and the world went quite crazy because that's all I watch is YouTube, and I know immediately knew it was down. But I don't know if it's a security issue or just DNS again. But because of these being secondary effects, it's a little bit harder to see. But Europe is really getting on top of it, going, software's making a lot of money making software that there's a balance when you ship a product. How much money do I want to put in securing it? If there's no consequences for not ship it, let the public figure it out, because I'm not getting in much trouble. I might get some egg on my face. I might have to, we did kind of hard code those credentials and we did kind of, get that product out the door faster, but it isn't real consequences, versus CRA has real consequences. These could be extinction level events for the company. And that's a big deal, because now you're going, I could be nuked.
Well, the one concept that sticks out to me is product recalls.
Yeah.
They talked about potential, like, I have to recall my SaaS software or recall my software and say it's no longer, like, you must get, but you get into this challenge too. But back to Patrick here in a second, but the CVE now having no penalties, it was really just a data index. It was a way for us to try to get things together.
All voluntary.
I have to document your crimes first, though. So it is a starting point.
That's fair. But like, think about this. When we think about a CVE, some of the challenges I'd like to highlight are the rapid expansion of CNAs that are now the company themselves that are responsible for taking their own vulnerabilities in. And I like to apply this theory called the middle theory to capitalism. And what that really is me restating, saying, if you make a better spoon, nobody's going to pay you for it if it's not valuable to them and it doesn't mean something to them, right? Like that little tiny teaspoon that you use, unless you're some British bloke that likes to have tea with a special spoon, it means nothing extra to you. And so what I say is that products never rise much above or fall very much below the maturity of the consuming entity, right? And so with software, because of those secondary factors you talk about, Tom, if someone's not a researcher like Patrick and digging into it and going, why did this one particular brand have 97,000 vulnerabilities in the last 2 years? It seems to be endemic of them having a really shit quality control program or any meaningful care about the code itself. You combine that with caveat emptor, which is essentially let the buyer beware, and you have this path where capitalism doesn't reward a company for making secure software. It's better to put a new feature in than it is to fix that bug or code. So Patrick, anything like that you want to just go down a path on? I've ranted for a minute. This is
exactly what you're saying, which is in building cyber companies, like I've seen it firsthand. Like, if you're building products, the goal is to solve the problem. It's not necessarily to ship secure software. I've been fortunate to work with people that cared enough about security because they're in security. But the reality is a lot of these organizations and companies that we see, especially like in AI is a great example, they're trying to ship to meet the customer's need as quick as they can, and security is an afterthought. And ultimately, I think what we're seeing is and what we're gonna see is we're gonna see a ton of security issues, vulnerabilities with this next wave of software, because inherently it's built insecure. A lot of it. I'm not saying all of it, but like,
Sure.
you know, you when you're building a company, like the first thing you don't hire is a CISO or a security team. You
Yeah,
hire
right.
core engineers to
Yeah,
solve the
right.
problem. And then you normally, once you get to a certain revenue threshold, then start to incorporate some form of security discipline. So at that point, it's already too late. Like you already decided to ship and build in secure by design. If you solve the problem, your core architecture is already architected. There are some people that are mindful of that and building secure initially, but also security can be a barrier to getting what you need out the door.
Sure.
So I think those are real realities in software. Going back to the CRA, the thing that I'm interested in is I think this goes into in effect somewhere around like September 26th. Um, Organizations, anyone that does business, sells or produces software, including open source, has to disclose vulnerabilities and particularly exploitation of vulnerabilities in a very quick time window.
What's that? Do you know what the time window was
I think
offhand,
I think for
Patrick?
exploitation, you have to report to the government within 48 hours, and you have to report publicly within 72 hours.
Holy crap.
That's not a like you could have a Friday discovery of exploitation,
Yeah.
and you got to do it in 72 hours. And so I think 48 hours to the government. So you know, double check my details. I'm not a lawyer. I tried to read it. It's like it's like 300 pages long.
Sure.
It's an ungodly long document, but then there's implications on revenue where they can fine you. I think 1 or 2% of your revenue if you're not in compliance with the CRA. And so I think what we're going to see is like we think the amount of vulnerability disclosures and the amount of exploited vulnerabilities we're seeing is high now. I think we're going to see that considerably increase.
What's your
over
gut
the
on
next,
that annual? Like the way CVEs are broken up, there's different CNAs all have a certain block. What's your gut belief, Patrick, on what the number of vulnerabilities disclosed annually is? Like
well, yeah.
a year. It's like just gut.
Well,
If you can.
disclosed vulnerabilities is different than what has a CVE, and we've obviously seen an
Okay.
increase in CVE. I think there's a talk Scott on our team's doing at VulnCon about this specifically, and what I've looked at is it's like, well, yeah, like a ton of the volume increase is WordPress plugins. Now everyone uses WordPress, so that's meaningful. Is it that meaningful? Like, you know, if like 90% of the increase, or maybe like
I see.
70% of the increase is WordPress plugins, like that without understanding the context of what the increase comes from. But generally the increase has been coming lately from not from the same reporters, you know, like Microsoft or Juniper or Cisco or any of these software CNA suppliers that have been consistent over the last decade.
Sure.
Most of the growth has come from a combination of open source software, GitHub, assigning CVEs for open source projects, and then PatchStack, WordFence, and WordPress plugins. And so, you know, I think generally then there's the reality of all the vulnerabilities that don't get a CVE identifier. And that's what my team right now spends a lot of time on is like, okay,
talk to me about how that happens, Patrick. How does something not get a CVE?
Well, yeah, you know, and I think you're going to have some vendors and products that are you know, very forward in this and making sure their CV assignment, but there's a lot of discrepancy, and also like in order to assign a CVE, it requires manual work.
Okay.
So any software supplier or researcher or bug bounty doing this type of work, essentially you have a vulnerability identified. Like now someone needs the process and they need to get request a CVE identifier. They have to generate CVSS. They have to mark the product vendor version. A lot of times these teams aren't on the product side, so they want to interact with the product team to ensure that the vulnerability is real. Because it could be reported.
This is in the company receiving the vulnerability. So this is in, let's say, Unify or Juniper or whoever it might be receiving that vulnerability.
Yeah, so I think like it gets overlooked how much work is actually involved in like, okay, it could be self-reported where I discover it. It could be externally reported. And then it's work to then process that. So normally you have a PSERT, a product security incidents response team, which is doing that coordination. And then the last step is publishing an advisory and then associating the CVE and publishing the CVE. In order to publish a CVE, you have to have a public advisory, right? And so Honestly, it is like I see it firsthand because you can look at this year's volume. We're second highest in CVE issuance as of today. I think we are. Yesterday, at least. I didn't check this morning, but yeah, I think people don't realize it's like there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes in order to even get to a point where you assign a CVE.
That's not even mentioning the testing. Like when I've had to turn in vulnerabilities, I turn in code, working examples of the code. They've got to go check that code and validate they
got to go
or not,
change
right?
the code, so
yeah.
And then like how do you determine internal urgency? Like a lot of people use a combination of critical, high, medium, low. Usually that's derived from manually scoring the vulnerability with CVSS. And that's a useful, tool for, I think, PCERT teams to score the vulnerability internally to determine like what the potential exposure is of a vulnerability, not necessarily threat. But yeah, that goes unspoken. But then it's like, okay, how much capacity do I have to disclose vulns, and can I disclose every single one of them? And I'm not trying like. I think the other aspect is it's like, yes, software suppliers should be doing this. Like there should be accountability in that.
Yeah.
And I think that's the kind of friction point with security researchers and software suppliers sometimes is like, the aspect of, is it a vulnerability? Is it real? Could it have real confidentiality? Gosh, I forgot the CIA triad.
Availability.
Yeah. But naturally, I think that's an aspect where like in when you have a program that then the scope can only be done by the vendor, like naturally that creates friction between security researchers and vendors, because the security researchers like, I replicated, I did it, and they're like, well, it's not really that important, so we're not.
This is Tom here.
Do anything.
And this is where I got in an argument several years ago with we'll put in air quotes, security researcher who is quite insistent on tagging me in places.
I remember this.
Well, yeah, I'm a fan of a lot of the PFSense and Netgate stuff, been using it for years, and they swore there was a security vulnerability in it. The problem is their write-up, their proof of concept of how you could execute this cross-site scripting in the web interface required the root password. Now, if you have the root password, why would you cross-site script to change a setting in the firewall when you have login to the interface to change a setting in the firewall, or you can just log in as root? So I didn't understand this, but it was funny because this person was really pushy on this particular topic, that it was a flaw. And we've seen this with other products. There's been some commercial products, the same thing, that some of their proof of concept required full DNS takeover of the domain in order to exploit it. Like, I have to completely fake being your domain and then get the user to click through a bunch of settings and then type in their username and password so they log into the portal. Therefore, the portal's not good. There's a similar topic going on I'm trying to dig into about security with password managers, because everyone's making a big deal about some security research. And I'm trying to dig into it. And it looks like the only way to make this happen would be to take over the entire domain and then get people fooled into logging into what's not really the password manager, but a fake version of the site. And I'm like, okay, that's a lot.
I already have the domain. I can SSO into the site quite likely.
Yeah.
Well, I think like taking it back, like I think number
passwords.
one, people are passionate in this space, especially security researchers. They're highly opinionated. And then I think you also just always have a ton of new researchers which are trying to learn.
Sure.
And so I think that does make it challenging. And now you have the AI component, and I call it the vibe code kitty. Like we used to have the script kitty. Now we have the vibe code kitty, right? Where it's like, now I can just have AI run at this stuff, tell me that there's vulnerabilities. I don't do any testing. I then throw them at the vendor. None of it works. But hey, so I do empathize a lot with these vendors right now of like, there's a lot of challenges from a software perspective side of like trying to wade through. And I see this firsthand because we have a report of vulnerability service of like what's real and what's not. And distinguishing between those things can be incredibly hard. And so naturally, I think a lot of people managing bug bounties, report of vulnerability services, PCERTs, like they are faced with the challenge of like wow, 50% of the stuff that gets submitted to us is complete hot garbage.
Yeah.
And naturally, I think like that then creates a shell with them where they just default to everything is hot garbage. Sometimes, not always.
I
But
like
yeah,
I
that's a
like the absolute
challenge.
transparency of the Curl project, and he has been a great outspoken person in the security space, and he's not hiding any of the problem with the slop that's submitted, and
Yeah.
that's why they've eliminated some of it. And I love the level of transparency they're operating at because of the challenges that Curl has. Curl's in everything, and gets not enough support and love, but it's really challenging all the AI slop, and I actually laughed. I seen someone say they're not script kiddies, they're Claude Cody's. And I'm like,
They're
okay, we'll go
Claude
with that.
Cody's. I'll be a Claude Cody. Feels like being a Swiftie or something. All right, I want to read Jason's comment. I don't know if I can read it all, but let's try. He said, I think we had an interesting confluence of events. By the way, if you don't know Jason Ferguson, you should. He's a brilliant and very kind soul, and he has taken a lot of crap from friends like Jason Slagle, myself, and Tom Lawrence over the years. But love this man. I said there was an influx of availability of training material, e.g. like Hack the Box, Try Hack Me, other extensibilities, big bug bounty hits, public mainstreams with $1 million payouts. The pandemic drove work from home, and now AI coming in to identify at an even larger scale, right? Like there's projects out there that do a fantastic job. MCP that I was just looking at yesterday, and some of the basic OWASP web testing and being pretty accurate about it by comparison to before. So, I don't want to miss the point that Patrick was making, which is companies aren't well incentivized to do this well, in my opinion, right? Companies aren't, as a software manufacturer, it's not like your investors like, hey, bro, let me give you 3 million to make sure you stand up a bang up infrastructure that really, no, that's not how that happens. It doesn't happen that way. So capitalism isn't set up well. You have a whole bunch of work that has to be done to validate these things, right? If I come in with this Matt Lee's cockamamie idea and I say you have to have root password to do it, let's say for PF sense, some jackass has to take that and go through and matriculate that and say no to it and go through the testing required and do all the things that are there. So, Patrick, it seems like other companies like you, in some extent, and what you do, have sprung up to solve some of this need and take on some of the, I don't know if you say commercialization of this or if you say, doing it well or at scale. I mean, even if you think of look back to HackerOne and some of the things they were trying to do and running bug bounty programs for that. I mean, this has turned into some degree of capitalism also answering this problem too. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah. On our front, I think a little bit different because like the report of vuln side is something we just do as a public service.
Sure.
But yeah, you look at bug bounties; those are a good example.
But that's my point. Yeah, we're just to tag back.
Definitely.
Like this had to come in as a service just to serve. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, on our side, right? Our commercial side is more like OSINT collection, generation of vuln intelligence, exploitation intelligence, all that fun stuff. On the other side of what we're talking about is the CVE disclosure and coordinated vuln disclosure. And generally, what we've attempted to do is it's kind of being an intermediary with CVD, where researchers find vulnerabilities, in some cases 0-day the vulnerability, because they're just tired of trying to work with vendors. Like they're exhausted. And there's some great researchers out there I could name, right, that are in this boat. And so they genuinely they want to do the right thing. They want to work through coordinated vuln disclosure. They want to make sure their CVE is.
Let's talk about that problem really quick, Patrick.
Yeah.
Why do they have to? Like, what drives the need to go publish information? Because you talk about coordinated disclosure. Yeah. Tom, do you want to define coordinated disclosure for people?
Sure. The coordinated and proper disclosure, some processes and procedures we have where if I'm a security researcher, I want to make sure I have notified the vendor. I want to cooperate with the vendor to make sure proof of concept works as expected so we can identify that this is truly a vulnerability. And then we have to work through the release cycle. So there's a time from which, maybe I want to publish my research. There's a time by which people have to patch it. Because as much as I would love to say everyone patches on the day one the patch comes out, I live in the real world. No doubt. So we're lucky if we can get it within 30 days out.
But why do you have to publish it? What is the drive to publish it? What's the either economic or social drive to publish?
There's a lot of social drive for it. As an internet shit poster, I enjoy the likes.
Oh, dude, don't encourage
the drive.
Don't encourage that.
you want it's hackers. It's funny, in the early days of hackers, the reason they got caught is because we can't shut up about the things we hack. That hasn't changed.
Sure.
It's just now that there's a proper procedure and we can blog about it now. So we get excited about sharing the research. It's kind of just a fun thing, because if you figure something out, this is generally the people who work in tech. If I figure out how this thing works, or I can make it work in a different way, my excitement is, hey, Matt, hey, Patrick, watch what happens when I poke this. I'm excited.
So I think you're partial reality. So the other side of it that I can talk about is, if Tom Lawrence can go RCE something, imagine what the nation states are doing with that stuff.
Too. Yeah.
And so from a threat perspective, the reality is in working with we focus on reverse engineering on the initial access side, which is like all of your edge devices. The reality is watching one engineer being able to pop an RCE and put a shell on these things. It's like, you don't think China has 500 people doing the same exact thing?
They've got 500 Tom Lawrences.
Ultimately, if we don't tell the public about this vulnerability, what that means is they're at a disadvantage, and it doesn't also put pressure on the vendor to fix. And there are many vendors, not all of them. There's some great vendors, but there are some vendors that want to sweep these things under the rug. And that's an interesting experience. Usually they tend to be smaller. There are some bigger ones as well, but
shut up, Tom. Shut up, Tom.
That's I think one of the biggest realities with the research side is, like, it is really important that there's a window. Like, for us in our CVD, I think we're 180 days. We give the supplier to fix their software, and we disclose if they don't do it by then.
Yeah.
I think that's the number. Double check.
That's double, if I remember.
But if we see exploitation in the wild, it's 7 days.
Yeah.
How do you build detections for something that you don't know exists?
Yeah, agreed.
100%.
And so there is a real reality that it's like, well, actually, like, depending on what is going on, it's really important that the information gets to the public, and preferably a CV is signed. And there's an interesting dynamic of, like, debates of, like, well, if we assign a CVE, are bad things going to happen? Or if this becomes public, and it's like, well, bad things are already happening, right? Like, let's not sweep that under the rug. Let's get the information out. So defenders can actually take action, because there's also mitigating controls, right?
Yeah.
So.
Well, there's a side I wanted to tackle. Tom, you sound like you're about to say something. If you had something you wanted to go.
No, I was just thinking, like, today, there's two things I have thoughts on. Today was a disclosure about a hard-coded credentials and some servers that were made by Dell. And one of the challenges with that is it's been exploited for a while. It got the CV.
Yeah, I saw that. I'm like, where's the timeline on this one?
But apparently it's like, oh, here's a CV, but this has been a long time exploit. And this is a double-edged sword when it comes to open source, or even some of the other really large ones. By disclosing what to look for, what to put into your web application firewall, like, hey, you should probably block an extra slash and a space.
Yeah, let's call that slash and grab. I'm sorry, Jason. I love you, buddy.
But those are the kind of challenges I get from the company standpoint. Once we tell you what to block, if you don't block, the first person to block it's safe. The people who found out about it tomorrow were already pwned.
Someone's already exploited it. And it's like, and to your point, it gives out the crumb.
It gives out how to do it.
Before you can defend as a defender. I wanted to tackle one uncovered piece. Tom, I love your point of, I touch it, and then this does this. That's so cool. Which I think is a Venn diagram of OG hackers and people that just love to tinker and have been
gray hair hackers like myself.
Yeah, or the no-haired hackers, I suppose.
Oh yeah, too.
But you have that. But then there's this other aspect of it that I think is part of a little bit of privilege, in the sense of people, there's an economics of the world. I happen to like to be able to feed my wife and my children. I happen to like to be able to rip one snow bikes out in the middle of the snow with Tom Lawrence and afford them if they break. I happen to like those things.
Yeah.
And that takes making money. And I think one of the challenges is the reason researchers have had to go down that path has been fame can equal money. Therefore, I need to go down that path for fame. as opposed to, hey, I could actually turn this in, paid a livable wage for finding this bug, and be paid accordingly without having to wrestle and fight for it. I would argue the economics of the situation that create the lack of the ability to deal with the bugs and the vulnerabilities and the things that need to be dealt with are the same economics problems that prevent a viable source of people to make a generally good living, being the cleanup they won't hire internally. And I'll let anybody chime in on that comment. But I think there's an economics problem that beleaguers this.
Yeah, I think with bug bounty programs have really changed the game a lot. If you're a fan of Dark Knight Diaries, they've interviewed a lot of people who are quite well off, and some of the people who made their first $1 million at like 18 years
Jason's
old.
point, right? The early days of this.
Yeah. So there's definitely a lot of incentive that I do have some hope for the future because of the excitement those people have. Although Instagram is filled with cringe fake hackers. There's a subreddit that just makes fun of them, and I subscribe to it because it brings me joy. But back to the point, I think that we do have a lot of people who are wanting to get into it. There is some economic viability for being a bug bounty, and if you can get, it's a little bit famous. There's some good that comes from it because the job market is difficult to break into. But if you got your name going, I'm the person that found this particular vulnerability, you got larger companies willing to pay you quite the good wage.
We just saw it happen, right?
Yeah.
Jason Slagle, there was a young female just got out of college that found a pretty cool vulnerability.
Yep.
They helped to get it disclosed. She had about 9,000 people try to connect with her on LinkedIn, and she was hired by a pen testing firm. Like if I remember the order of operands there. So like there's a path there for sure.
There's absolutely a path there. So there's a lot of people wanting to do it. It's kind of a little bit becoming maybe the rock star of a certain subset of people. Like, when we were growing up, you wanted to be the rock star. You wanted to be the basketball or sports ball player. So I think there's a big following that's coming for a lot of that too. So there's hope that people are getting into the technology for that reason as well.
Yeah. Patrick, anything to add on that from that perspective? Or
I think those are very exceptional people. Like they're dropping real vulnerabilities that are complex, is what I would say there. I think a lot of people are just trying to CVE farm to put CVEs on the resume, and that far outweighs the good ones. And naturally, I think, I don't know about you, Tom, but in Matt, but it's like, I never planned to be an influencer or make money on my
I'm
influence.
Not now. Well, I think I influence.
And so I it's like I have a theory. I don't take money from third parties to pay me to do stuff. I do it because I like it. And it kind of became part of my job. But that's not like how I intended to make money. Like I was a sales engineer, product marketing, tons of different roles in product, whatever needs to get done. And so I think just this demographic of like, oh, you get a bunch of CVEs, you're going to go get a job, you post something. There's some of that, but I think it's very, very, handful focused of people. And it's probably more like they're just really good and circumstances found themselves. Right.
So we have just a little bit of time left. And I don't know if we've really stayed true to like talking about the problems. I think we talked about the economic challenges and some of those things. What would you, Patrick, give advice if somebody who's coming to turn in a vulnerability of a company that they found? Like, what are the things you've seen that make them successful and make that easy? And what are the things you've seen that just fucking
if you go grab Claude and you run it against some open software, discover something, and you submit it to someone, like, don't do that.
Yeah.
Like I'm not saying don't use AI. AI is incredibly useful. You can use it. The important thing, right, is that you're taking that information and testing and validating the vulnerability actually works. If you don't do test validation, you are wasting everyone's time.
Yeah.
And so that's the number one thing I would say. And then from a submission standpoint, it's like submit your details in full, like product, vendor, exploit. The more information you can provide in detail, the easier it's going to make the person on the other side in an incredibly clean format. And so those are the things, I would encourage, like the more concise, better information that you can provide, but ensuring that there's testing validation done before you're going and submitting it to a third party. Because, I honestly think even the bug bounties, it's like spray and pray submissions from AI, hoping that I'm going to get a payout or I'm going to get a CVE assigned. That makes it really difficult for all the people on the other side who receive these types of submissions.
Which is back to the point of Jason's that, like, you know, now with AI coming in, it's going to be even much larger of a problem for you to have to sort through just because of the amount of slop that can be passed in that way.
It generates more vulnerabilities and it finds more vulnerabilities. Like we're
winning, self-sustaining. What about talking about vulnerabilities after they've made that submission? What are some of the things you've seen people really cause legal problems for themselves with?
Oh man, I try and stay away from legal stuff as much as I can. I think, you know, dropping a 0 day without communicating with the vendor isn't a great one. You know, I think arguments on disclosure, you know, publicly going out can risk some of that. It's a challenge. I'm not a lawyer either, so like don't take my advice. But yeah, I think a lot of times like security researchers can get frustrated on why a patch isn't out or why the thing isn't fixed or why there isn't a CVE. Sometimes they can default to just being like, screw this, you know, and I empathize. Like there's some really good researchers we work with that are like, I just stopped working with vendors because I had so many conflicts and issues. And it's like, cool, let us help you. Let us work with you to make sure that information gets to a vendor. And CVE assignment happens as well. And so, yeah, I think there's just some different dynamics there as far as like, you know, having understanding there's different paths and different opportunities on how you can disclose.
Yeah. Especially the motivations of those actors, right? Like if it's somebody that genuinely cares and wants this fixed, they get really frustrated when they're 9 months later. Let's say maybe you've made a disclosure in April about something. They put a WAF rule in, but don't fix the core software. And for anybody running that software themselves, let's call some random date like July 4th, 2021, just gets destroyed, right? And I have to imagine as a researcher, you're pretty pissed that you sat there waiting. I digress. Go.
Yeah, I think the other thing on the waiting side, and this is really important, like internally, like just because you reported it and you're like, oh, 180 days, like if you don't actually interact with them for 100 days, they're all people. Like that might have gotten,
you're not the top of the inbox
not getting tracked. So the one thing I would advise people to do is drop an email at the 30-day point, drop an email at the 60-day point, drop an email at the 120-day point. That way, no one's surprised when you drop your public disclosure and you've done your due diligence in making sure that communication was direct, the information was available. And so I think that, you know, tends to be important. And then I think having some level of flexibility in communication, understanding like we're all people, like this is software, it requires resources. There's a real dynamic imbalance there. I think like both the vendor and security researchers need to have a better understanding of.
Yeah. Tom, we can just talk for forever, but I know we've covered kind of the economics of it. We've covered some of it. We haven't got real deep in the details of like MITRE or like none of that. And also, Tom, you called it MITRE?
MITRE?
I
was thinking about MITRE box. You know, there's an edited version of me on YouTube that says the right words because post editing, I go, crap, why did I say it that way?
Anything to add that we haven't covered? Because after that, I'm going to make Patrick skate since he's got a skateboard and he's got a park. We're going to make.
Let me get ready. Well, you guys,
you get ready. All right,
I gotta turn this motion off. I think. There we go.
Gotta go widescreen here.
Let's set it up.
One of the things I say is really important is anytime I've dove into finding bugs, whether it's a security bug or just a UI element bug or a weird behavior in a product I'm using, I have always learned more by understanding the bug. It is a great way to just better understand a product, whether it's a storage or virtualization system. I've worked with developers to report sometimes just like, hey, this weird behavior when I change the memory settings like this. But it also gives me a lot of insight because sometimes they'll send you commands back and forth like, oh, I'll try this or try that. So those things are kind of fun. And I encourage people to do it because it'll make you understand the technology you're using better. So even if it's not the end goal of making memes and shit posting on the internet, there is a real tangible, I am better at using that tool or have a deeper understanding of the underlying functions of the tool because I took the time to really understand why something didn't work in the way I expected, and maybe message back and forth to developers. I also get to learn some secret commands. I make a lot of notes of the hidden diagnostic commands that exist in products I didn't know about. I got a whole collection of those.
Well, it's perfect timing. I guess we're gonna see Patrick skate. Let's do it. I'm ready.
Hopefully I don't wreck myself.
That's no liability for Cyber Matt Lee if you do. Oh,
I gotta do better for you than that. Let's Woo, there we go.
I don't know if Matt skates, but I do not, so I'm amazed at it.
Little rock fakey.
Tom, you know that means we're gonna have to rip dirt bikes on the next time we're doing one of these things.
Woo! See if I can go away with my. There we go.
Oh man.
We'll just have you ride away in the distance, Matt. That'll be how we end some of these.
Yeah, that's how we just finish it off, right?
Wait, one more. I'll do it.
Okay, one more. All right, one more rip.
One more. Give me a sec. This is my big air. Rock to fakie. Tail stall. Whoa,
nice. Saved it. What's funny, Patrick, you and I, when I came to your office, you explained that during COVID, like this was, this sort of became an obsession for you, right? The office, and all those things. And I don't know, anybody reflecting at home been through one of those transitions, but yeah. So closing it out, I will say, Tom, thank you for being here. Patrick, I thank you for what you do. I mean, just the aspect and the work of what you do, what so many in that, and you're not even breathing hard. That's the amazing part about it. It's hell being 40, man. It's hell being 40. But I tease. But the challenges, and I hope this episode unpacks some of the challenges of actually in the empathy of being a software company, dealing with vulnerabilities in your software, being a researcher, dealing with caring about, hey, I pressed this button and bad things happen, to Tom's point, and trying to get that solved, but also just understanding that we have to solve this. And I'll tackle you this. Mark Spake said, "Love it, skater." So yeah, you got the full 8 in there too. Nice. Yeah, we got our elite speak skater.
Yeah. See you later.
Later. But I think the challenge is when you look at CISA, and Jenny Strelly added this after leaving CISA, but secure by design. I think the second part, secure by default, that's a challenge that we could unpack in a whole nother episode of. But if I make it admin, they get in 90% of the time. If I make it admin and the serial number on the side of the modem, these numpties call in for support 33% of the time because they can't see a picture of the side of the modem that looks like theirs or something.
Right.
I digress. But you have this, and then the last one that she added was, and I think it's the only one that works, and that's why I'm making this video, is secure by demand. Until you ask for better, it's not going to fucking change. And at the end of the day, economics and capitalism have to solve this. I'm just thankful for the work you're doing, Patrick, and great to get to spend some time with you in your office. Thank you for being here.
Awesome. Man. And I got to skate.
You did. And that Gurkon shirt, I think I spoke at that Gurkon. Was the one that Jason Slagle and I did called MSPs suck, but the world without them is worse. And so,
hey, and the CFP for Gurkon's open right now, so everyone should submit their talks.
Tom, Patrick, you want to get in some fights about actual data? I'd like to talk about some actual flaws in the CVE system at a tactical and technical level, and that'd be awesome. All right.
I'll help me.
See y'all. You make memes.